The air inside the restaurant felt heavier than it should. At table 7, near the far window, a man sat completely still. He wasn't eating. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was just there, frozen. His hands rested flat on the white tablecloth, palms down, as if he were physically holding himself in place. His shoulders were rigid. His breathing unnaturally controlled. Sophie Parker had seen grief before. She recognized it instantly, the way someone tries so hard to appear fine that they stop looking human. She approached slowly, instinctively softening her steps. When she reached his table, she tilted her head slightly, her brow tightening in quiet concern. "Sir, are you all right?" The words barely left her throat. For a long moment, he didn't respond. He didn't move. Then, slowly, so slowly it felt like watching something break in real time, his head lifted. His eyes met hers. And that's when it happened. His face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Worse than that. It was the kind of breaking that comes from a body that can't hold itself together anymore. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His hands began to tremble against the table. His shoulders shook. And then he cried. Not the kind of crying you can hide. Not the kind you swallow back. This was raw, a full year of silence shattering all at once. His breath caught in his chest, as if something inside him were tearing apart. Tears streamed freely down his face, and he didn't try to stop them. He couldn't. Sophie froze. Her whole body went rigid. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She could only stand there, watching this man, this stranger, fall apart in front of her. And then she felt it. A single tear slipped down her own cheek. She hadn't realized she was crying until the warmth touched her jaw. Her hands began to shake. The tray slid slightly in her grip, but she caught it in time. She pressed her lips together, trying to stop whatever was rising inside her chest. But she couldn't look away from him. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His head had fallen into his hands, his fingers digging into his temples as if trying to keep himself from breaking completely. His shoulders convulsed with every breath. The sound of his crying was soft, but it filled the space around them. Sophie's throat tightened. Her vision blurred. She stepped back once, then again, her legs unsteady beneath her. Other diners were beginning to notice. A woman at the next table glanced over, discomfort flickering across her face. A waiter near the kitchen doors hesitated, unsure whether he should intervene. But Sophie couldn't move. Because she recognized this. She recognized the shape of this pain. She didn't know what had caused it, didn't know who this man was or what he had lost. But she knew what it looked like when someone's entire world had been ripped away and they were still expected to keep breathing. She knew because she had felt it too. Her hand lifted slowly, almost instinctively, toward him, but she stopped herself. She didn't know what to say. There were no words for this. His breathing began to slow, but his hands stayed pressed against his face. His body still trembled. He looked like someone who had held something unbearable for so long that his body had finally given out. Sophie's chest ached. Her own tears kept falling, silent, unstoppable. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a bright, elegant restaurant on a quiet Thursday afternoon, two strangers who had never exchanged a single word were connected by something neither of them could name. Something broken. Something irreversible. She didn't know it yet. But this man's pain was about to change everything. Sophie didn't remember walking away from his table. One moment she was standing there, frozen, watching him cry. And the next, she was in the kitchen, her back pressed against the cold metal counter. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the edge just to steady herself. Her manager, David, appeared beside her. His voice was low, Careful. Sophie. What happened out there? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat felt tight, like something heavy was lodged there. She shook her head slowly, unable to form a single word. David glanced toward the dining room, then back at her. His expression softened. Take 5 minutes. I'll cover your section. She nodded, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Her chest was still tight. Her breathing uneven. That man's face kept flashing in her mind. The way his entire body had collapsed. The way his hands had trembled. The way he looked at her for just 1 second. Right before everything inside him broke. She didn't know him. She had never seen him before. But somehow, his pain had reached inside her, and loosened something she had buried a long, long time ago. Sophie pressed her palms against her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. She couldn't fall apart. Not here. Not now. After a few minutes, she straightened, wiped her face, and walked back out into the dining room. The man was still there. He was sitting upright now. His hands rested on the table again. His face was carefully blank, but his eyes were red. His breathing still unsteady. He looked like someone who had survived something terrible, and was trying, desperately, to pretend nothing had happened. Sophie approached him slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't say anything at first. She simply placed a glass of water in front of him, her movements quiet and deliberate. Then she set a folded napkin beside it. He looked up at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, he whispered, "I'm sorry." His voice was hoarse, barely there. Sophie shook her head quickly. "You don't have to apologize." He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if the kindness in her voice was almost painful. When he opened them again, something raw, unguarded, was visible in his expression. "I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have." "It's okay," she said softly. "Really?" He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening like he was holding something back. Then he looked down at his hands. "You remind me of someone." Sophie's breath caught. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. The weight in his voice told her everything. He exhaled slowly. His shoulders sagged. "The way you tilted your head, just now, when you asked if I was all right." His voice cracked. "She used to do that." Sophie's chest tightened again. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if she should say anything. So she just stood there, silent, letting him speak. "My daughter," he continued, his voice barely holding together. She's gone." The words hung between them. Heavy. Final. Sophie's eyes burned. She blinked hard, trying not to break. Her throat ached. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. Slowly. Like acknowledging her words took everything he had left. Then he looked at her again. And for the first time, she saw something in his eyes besides grief. Something like recognition. As if he had found someone who understood. Even if she didn't know the details. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Sophie." He repeated it softly, almost testing the sound. Then he nodded. "Hiroshi." She nodded back, her hands still trembling slightly. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people carrying different kinds of loss. Standing in the middle of a bright, elegant restaurant, while everyone else went on with their normal day. And somehow, the world felt a little less unbearable. Hiroshi reached for the glass of water. His hands were still unsteady. He took a slow sip and set it down carefully. "Thank you," he said quietly. Sophie didn't know what he was thanking her for. She hadn't done anything. hadn't said anything profound. She had just been there. But maybe that was enough. She gave him a small, careful nod and stepped back, leaving him with his thoughts. As she walked away, she felt something shift inside her. Something she couldn't name yet. But something that felt like the beginning of something she never expected. And in the silence that followed, they both knew this wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. 3 days passed before Hiroshi returned. Sophie noticed him the second he walked through the door. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. She had been thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. About his breakdown. About the daughter he had lost. About the weight in his voice when he spoke her name. He moved slowly through the restaurant, every step controlled. A man held together by discipline alone. But Sophie saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from too many sleepless nights, too much grief. He didn't choose his old table. This time, he sat in a corner booth near the back. Hidden. Removed from everyone else. Sophie approached him without hesitation. When she reached his table, she didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, steady and calm. Hiroshi looked up. For a brief moment, relief crossed his face. "You're here," he said quietly. "I'm here." He nodded slowly, as if those 2 words meant more than they should. Sophie placed a menu in front of him, though he didn't touch it. He folded his hands on the table and exhaled. "I wasn't sure I should come back," he admitted. "After what happened. I'm glad you did." He looked at her, surprised by her sincerity. "Why?" She hesitated. She didn't know how to explain that his pain had stayed with her, that it had opened something inside her she had tried to ignore for years. So she said, "Because I think you needed to." Hiroshi's jaw tightened. He looked toward the window. Soft light filtered through thin clouds. Outside looked peaceful. Inside, she could still feel the storm in him. "I can't go home," he said suddenly. "Not right now." Sophie didn't ask why. She already understood. "My wife." He paused. "She doesn't speak anymore." "Not really. She stays in our daughter's room. She won't let me in. She won't let anyone in." His voice cracked. He pressed his lips together. Sophie imagined it clearly. A woman frozen in grief. A man standing outside a closed door. Both drowning. Unable to reach each other. "How long has it been?" she asked softly. "A year." "Yesterday." Sophie's breath caught. Yesterday. The day he collapsed here. Hiroshi looked at her again, eyes rimmed with red. "I thought leaving the house for a few hours would help. But when I saw you," his voice dropped. "You looked at me the way she used to, with that same concern, that same kindness." Tears stung Sophie's eyes. She blinked them back. "I didn't mean to." "No," his voice was firm. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I haven't felt anything in so long. I've been numb. Completely numb. But when you looked at me like that, everything came back at once." Sophie swallowed hard. She understood more than he knew. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly. She didn't care that she was still working. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Hiroshi nodded. "What was her name?" He went still. Then, slowly, "Hannah." The name hung between them, delicate, painful. "She was 17, he said. Smart, kind. She made people feel seen. Like they mattered." Sophie's throat tightened. "She sounds incredible." "She was." His voice broke. "She was everything." Silence settled over them. Heavy. unavoidable. Sophie didn't try to fill it. After a moment, Hiroshi looked at her again. "What about you?" he asked softly. "You said you understood, that day. Like you knew what I was feeling." Her chest tightened. "My mom died when I was 8, she said gently. "Car accident." His eyes softened. "And my dad, he's alive, but not really there. He shut down after she died. He never came back." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. "So I get it," she whispered. "That kind of grief that makes you disappear." Hiroshi held her gaze for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be," she said. "Yes, I do. No child should have to grow up alone." Her eyes burned. She looked down quickly. Hiroshi reached across the table, slowly, hesitantly, and placed his hand over hers. A small gesture, simple, but it felt like the first real connection either of them had felt in a long time. And in that quiet moment, something between them shifted. Something neither of them could take back. Hiroshi started coming to the restaurant every week. Always on Thursdays. Always in the afternoon, when the dining room was quiet and the light was soft. He never stayed long, an hour, maybe 2, but it was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to feel like a person again. Sophie began to anticipate his arrival. She found herself glancing toward the door more often on Thursdays. And each time he walked in, something inside her lifted, not romantically, but deeply, quietly. It was the feeling of being seen by someone who understood invisible weight. Their conversations were never long. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Hiroshi would sit in his corner booth, and Sophie would bring him tea without asking. He would nod. She would refill his cup. And in the silence between them, there was more communication than most people managed with words. But today was different. Today, Hiroshi looked worse. His face was drawn. His eyes darker than usual. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, and he set it down fast, as if afraid she would notice. But Sophie noticed. She slid into the seat across from him without asking. What happened? Hiroshi didn't answer at first. He stared at his hands, jaw tightening, as if choosing whether to speak. Finally, he exhaled. "Last night, I tried to talk to her. My wife." His voice was thin. "I thought maybe enough time had passed. Maybe we could finally." He stopped, his throat closing. "She wouldn't even look at me," he whispered. "I stood outside Hannah's room. I heard her crying. I knocked. I told her I was there. That I missed our daughter too. That we needed to face this together." His hands curled into fists. "She told me to leave." Sophie's chest ached. Devastation hung over him like a shadow. "She blames me," he whispered. "I know she does. She doesn't say it, but I feel it. She thinks I should have protected Hannah. That I should have known something was wrong." Was there something wrong? Sophie asked softly. Hiroshi's face tightened. He pressed his fingers to his temples. "I don't know," he said hoarsely. "That's what destroys me. I don't know." He swallowed hard. Hannah seemed fine. She smiled. She laughed. She had friends. She was doing well in school. He paused, his voice barely a breath. "But maybe I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I was too focused on work. Maybe she needed me, and I didn't see it." His voice broke. He covered his face with his hands. Sophie reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You can't do that to yourself," she said softly. "You can't blame yourself for something you didn't know." "How do you know?" he asked, voice muffled. "How do you know I didn't miss something?" Because I can hear it in your voice, she said gently. You loved her. You still love her. And love doesn't miss things on purpose. Hiroshi lowered his hands slowly. His eyes were red and wet. He looked at her as if she had said something he desperately needed, but wasn't sure he could believe. My wife doesn't see it that way, he whispered. Your wife is drowning, Sophie said quietly. And when people are drowning, they push away the only person who might save them. Hiroshi stared at her, raw and confused. How do you know that? Sophie hesitated. Because I've done it too. His expression shifted. After my mom died, Sophie continued, my dad tried. For a while. But I was angry, hurt, lost. And I didn't know how to tell him that. So I pulled away. I stopped talking. Stopped letting him in. Her voice wavered. And eventually, he stopped trying. Now we're just strangers in the same world. Hiroshi's expression softened. He turned his hand over beneath hers, his fingers curling gently around hers. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Sophie nodded. Every day. They sat in silence, hands joined across the table. Outside, the afternoon light faded, shadows stretching across the dining room. Finally, Hiroshi spoke again. Would you? He hesitated. Would you come to my home? To meet her? Sophie's eyes widened. Your wife? Hiroshi nodded. I don't know if it will help. I don't know if she'll even open the door. But... His voice softened. You're the only person who's made me feel human again in a year. Maybe she needs that too. Sophie's heart pounded. She didn't know if she was strong enough to walk into someone else's grief. But when she looked at Hiroshi, at the hope and the exhaustion in his eyes, she knew she couldn't say no. Okay, she whispered. I'll come. Hiroshi sagged with relief. His grip tightened on her hand, then loosened. Thank you, he breathed. Sophie nodded, her throat tight. And as she walked away, she felt it. A shift inside her. A step toward something that would change all of them forever. The house was quieter than Sophie expected. She stood in the entryway, hands clasped in front of her, taking in the pristine elegance. Polished wood floors. Minimalist furniture. Soft lighting. Everything looked perfect. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Hiroshi closed the door gently behind her. Here, in his own home, he looked smaller, as if the walls carried the grief he tried to hide. She's upstairs, he said softly. In Hannah's room. Sophie nodded, her throat tight. He led her through the living room, past a dining table that hadn't been touched in months, past family photos he didn't dare look at. One photo caught Sophie's eye, a bright-smiled girl with dark hair, head tilted mid-laugh. Hannah. Sophie's chest constricted. The girl looked so alive. So full of light. It was impossible to match that image with the weight in this house. They reached the staircase. Hiroshi stopped, staring upward. I should warn you, he murmured. She might not come out. She might not even acknowledge you. That's okay, Sophie whispered. He gave her a grateful look, then climbed the stairs. Sophie followed. The hallway upstairs was darker. Every curtain drawn. Hiroshi stopped at a closed door at the end. His hand hovered over the knob, but he didn't open it. Instead, he knocked quietly. Naomi, he said, voice thin. There's someone here. Someone I want you to meet. Silence. He knocked again, more desperate this time. Please. Just for a few minutes. Nothing. Tension rolled off him. Hope and fear tangled inside his posture. Sophie stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his arm. Let me try, she whispered. He stepped aside. Sophie pressed her palm flat against the door. Mrs. Takeda, my name is Sophie, she began softly. I know you don't know me, but I want to tell you something. She breathed in. I lost my mom when I was 8, and for a long time, I thought I had to carry that pain alone. That no one could understand. Her voice wavered. But the truth is, grief gets heavier when you keep it locked inside, not lighter. Silence stretched. Sophie started to step back. A soft sound. Almost nothing. The door unlocked. She looked at Hiroshi, his eyes wide, then gently pushed the door open. The room was dim. Curtains shut tight. A woman sat on the edge of the bed, back turned, shoulders curved inward, hands folded in her lap. Naomi. Sophie stepped inside slowly. She didn't speak. She just waited. After a long moment, Naomi's thin voice broke the silence. You lost your mother. It wasn't a question. Yes, Sophie said quietly. How old are you now? 22. Naomi trembled. So you've lived without her for 14 years. Yes. Does it get easier? Sophie's heart twisted. She wanted to lie. She couldn't. No, she said softly. It doesn't get easier. But you learn to carry it differently. Naomi's head bowed. Her hands clenched. I don't know how to carry it at all, she whispered. Sophie moved closer and sat beside her, not too close, but near enough. You don't have to know right now, she said gently. You just have to keep breathing. Naomi slowly turned her head. Sophie's breath caught. The woman's face was gaunt. Her eyes hollow and red. She looked like someone who had cried for a year straight. My husband brought you here, Naomi murmured. Why? Because he's worried about you, Sophie said. And because he doesn't know how to reach you anymore. Naomi's jaw clenched. He shouldn't worry about me. Why not? Because I don't deserve it. The rawness of her voice hit Sophie like a blow. Why do you think that? Sophie asked softly. Naomi's eyes filled. Because I should have protected her. I should have known. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to know when something's wrong. Her voice shattered. But I didn't. I didn't see it. And now she's gone, and it's my fault. Sophie placed her hand gently over Naomi's. No, she said firmly. It's not your fault. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Sophie's voice strengthened. I spent years blaming myself for not saving my mother, for not being enough to keep my dad present. But grief lies to us. Naomi looked at her through tears. Grief makes us believe we failed, Sophie continued. But sometimes terrible things happen, and there was nothing we could have done. Naomi's face crumpled. A sob tore through her. She collapsed forward, shaking with grief. Sophie pulled her into her arms, holding her tightly as she cried, deep, wrenching sobs that had been trapped for a year. In the doorway, Hiroshi stood frozen, a hand over his mouth, tears streaming down his face. And for the first time in a year, the silence in that house finally broke. Sophie started visiting the house every week. It wasn't planned. It wasn't discussed. It just happened. After that first day, Hiroshi called her, quietly, and asked if she would come back. Naomi had asked for her. Those 3 words, Naomi asked for her, tightened something inside Sophie. Something like purpose. Something like belonging. So she returned. And then she returned again. And again. At first, the visits were short. Sophie would sit with Naomi in Hannah's room. Sometimes Naomi cried. Sometimes she said nothing, staring at the walls with empty eyes. And Sophie simply sat with her. Steady. quiet, present. Slowly, almost too slowly to notice, things began to shift. One afternoon, Naomi spoke first. She loved this room, she whispered, eyes drifting across the pale blue walls. The bookshelves full of novels. The desk by the window where sunlight once poured in. She wrote for hours. I never knew what she wrote. Her voice cracked. I wish I had asked. Sophie looked at the desk, imagining a 17-year-old girl pouring thoughts onto paper. Thoughts her parents would never know. Maybe she wanted some things to be just hers, Sophie said gently. That doesn't mean she didn't love you. Tears filled Naomi's eyes. She nodded slowly. Another day, Naomi asked, "What do you remember most about your mother?" No one had ever asked Sophie that. Her laugh, Sophie said softly. Loud. Unfiltered. She never cared who heard. A small smile tugged at her lips. And the way she tried to braid my hair before school. She wasn't good at it. The braids were always crooked. Naomi exhaled shakily. Hannah hated when I did her hair too. She complained the whole time. Her voice broke. But she still let me. Sophie reached for Naomi's hand and held it gently. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was shared. Downstairs, Hiroshi watched from the hallway as Sophie finally stepped out of Hannah's room. He had been standing there for 20 minutes, too afraid to disturb them, too hopeful to walk away. She's resting, Sophie said softly. Hiroshi nodded. His voice trembled. Thank you. You don't have to keep thanking me, she whispered. Yes, I do. You've given us something I thought we lost. What? Hope. The word hung between them, fragile but alive. Sophie blinked quickly, overwhelmed. Hiroshi stepped closer. She asks about you, he said quietly. When you're not here. She asks when you're coming back. What you're doing. He swallowed hard. She's starting to leave that room. Sophie's breath caught. She is. Hiroshi nodded, eyes glistening. Yesterday, she came downstairs for breakfast. His voice broke. She sat with me. First time in a year. Sophie covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Hiroshi. It's because of you, he said, voice raw. You reached her in a way I couldn't. I didn't do anything special, Sophie whispered. I just. You listened. He held her gaze. You sat with her pain. You made her feel seen. His voice lowered. You made both of us feel seen. Sophie couldn't answer. Her throat was too tight. Hiroshi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've become part of this family, Sophie, whether you meant to or not. The words hit her like a soft blow. Family. She hadn't felt part of one since her mother died, since her father vanished into grief. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered. I'm just trying. That's all any of us can do, Hiroshi said. They stood there in a heavy quiet, full of things neither of them said. Then Hiroshi looked down, hesitant. There's something I need to tell you. Sophie's heart skipped. Naomi wants to talk to both of us. Together. A beat. Tomorrow. Both of us. Sophie whispered. Hiroshi nodded. She says, it's time. Time for what? His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped. I think she's ready to tell us what happened. The day Hannah died. Sophie exhaled sharply, her body going cold. She had known this moment would come. The truth had been waiting beneath every conversation, every silence. But now that it was here, she felt unsteady. Hiroshi looked at her, eyes filled with fear and need. Will you be there? He asked softly. When she tells us? Every instinct told Sophie to step back, to protect herself. to stay out of the storm. But Hiroshi was no longer a stranger. He was something closer to family. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll be there." Relief washed over him. His shoulders sagged. As Sophie left the house, a chill ran through her. Tomorrow would change everything. Sophie arrived the next day just as the afternoon light softened across the front of the house. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't slept. Her mind spun with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. What had happened to Hannah? How had she died? And why had Naomi held the truth inside for a year? Hiroshi opened the door before she knocked. His face was pale, drawn. He looked like a man preparing for something unbearable. "She's in the living room," he said quietly. "Waiting." Sophie nodded and followed him through the silent house. When they stepped into the living room, she froze. Naomi was sitting on the couch, hands folded in her lap, posture rigid. But she wasn't in Hannah's room. She was here, present, eyes red but clear. "Sit," she whispered. "Please." Sophie and Hiroshi sat across from her, the room heavy with tension. After a long, trembling breath, Naomi spoke. "I need to tell you what happened," she said softly. "If I don't, it will destroy me." Hiroshi leaned forward. "Naomi, I have to," she insisted. She looked at Sophie. "You said grief tells us lies. But what if it isn't lying? What if I did fail?" Sophie's chest tightened. "Naomi, please, just listen." Sophie nodded. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, then tears slid down her face. "The morning Hannah died, we had an argument." Hiroshi stiffened, breath catching. "She wanted to go to a concert. I said no. Exams were coming. I told her she could go another time." Naomi swallowed hard. She said I never let her do anything. That I didn't trust her. Her hands clenched. I got angry. I said she was being dramatic. Told her to go to her room until she calmed down. Her voice broke. She looked at me, with so much hurt. And she said, Naomi's voice dropped, "Maybe I should just disappear. Then you wouldn't have to worry." Hiroshi made a wounded sound, covering his mouth. "I didn't think she meant it," Naomi whispered. "I thought she was just upset. I thought we would talk later." Tears streamed down her face. "But that was the last thing I ever said to her." Sophie's vision blurred. "Hannah went to her room," Naomi continued. "And hours later, Hiroshi found her." Hiroshi bent forward, shoulders shaking. "She took pills," Naomi whispered. "Too many. The doctors said she must have taken them right after our fight." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth as a sob escaped her. Naomi looked at her husband, face twisted in agony. "I killed her," she cried. "She's gone because of me." "No," Hiroshi gasped, voice raw. "Yes," she insisted. "If I had just listened." "Stop." Sophie's voice sliced through the room. Both parents stared at her. Sophie stood, trembling, tears streaking down her face. "You can't do this to yourself," she said fiercely. "You can't blame yourself for something you couldn't have known." "I should have known." "How?" Sophie cried. "How were you supposed to know one argument would lead to that? How could you see pain she never showed?" Naomi froze, breath shaking. Sophie knelt in front of her. "Hannah made a choice that day," she said gently. "A terrible, irreversible choice. Not because you were a bad mother. Not because you didn't love her. But because she was hurting in ways you couldn't see." Her voice softened. "Sometimes the people we love hide their deepest pain. And that is not our fault." Naomi collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. Grief shook her whole body. Sophie wrapped her arms around her, holding her tightly. Hiroshi moved beside them, tears streaming down his face. He placed a trembling hand on Naomi's back. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned toward him, and for the first time in a year, she let him hold her. They clung to each other, both shaking, both drowning in grief, but together now. Finally together. Sophie stepped back, giving them space. Her own tears fell silently as she watched them hold onto each other like their lives depended on it. And in that moment, she understood something she never had before. Healing didn't mean the pain disappeared. It didn't erase grief. It didn't bring Hannah back. It meant learning to carry the pain together, piece by piece, day by day, and sometimes that was enough to keep breathing. 3 months passed. The house was different now. Not lighter, Hannah's absence still lingered in every corner, but softer, breathable. Naomi began opening the curtains again. Small steps. The sunlight that filled the rooms felt strange at first, too bright for a house that had drowned in grief for a year. But she let it stay. Hiroshi noticed every change. How Naomi sat at the dining table again, even if she barely ate. How she sometimes smiled, faint, fleeting, when Sophie said something gentle. How she touched him now and then, a hand on his shoulder, a brief brush of fingers in the hallway. Small things. But everything. Sophie had become a constant part of their lives. She visited twice a week, sometimes more. They sat together in the living room drinking tea, talking about simple things, the weather, books, work, nothing heavy. But sometimes, when it felt right, they talked about Hannah. Not with crushing guilt. Not with unbearable sorrow. Just quietly. With love. Naomi shared stories, Hannah refusing to wear matching socks, sneaking cookies, reading under the covers with a flashlight long after bedtime. Hiroshi told stories too, Hannah sitting in his office as a child, pretending to work beside him, scribbling nonsense on important papers while he tried not to laugh. And Sophie listened. She laughed with them. She cried with them. She made space for them to remember without breaking. One afternoon, Naomi did something she hadn't done since Hannah died. She went into Hannah's room, not to hide in the dark, but to gather a few things. Slowly, reverently, she folded some of Hannah's clothes and placed them in boxes. Not to erase her, but to breathe. Hiroshi found her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding one of Hannah's sweaters. He froze, afraid she'd slipped backward. But Naomi's eyes were clear. "I'm not ready to close this room," she said. "But I think I'm ready for it to be more than a shrine." Hiroshi sat beside her. "What do you need?" Naomi exhaled shakily. "I want to read her journals." Hiroshi's breath caught. "Are you sure?" Naomi nodded. "I need to know who she was, not just who I thought she was." So they read them. Together. Over the next weeks, they sat side by side, turning page after page of Hannah's private world. Her dreams. Her fears. Her loneliness. Some entries made them laugh. Some shattered them. Some broke their hearts all over again. And then, they found her final entry. "I don't want to hurt anymore. I don't want to be a burden. I love them so much. I hope they know that. I hope they forgive me." Naomi collapsed into Hiroshi's arms, sobbing. Hiroshi held her tightly, crying into her hair. Because now they knew. It wasn't one argument. It wasn't Naomi's fault. It wasn't Hiroshi's work. It was Hannah's pain, long, hidden, unbearable, that had taken her. And that truth, as devastating as it was, freed them. They could stop blaming themselves. They could start forgiving themselves. They could start healing. One evening, Sophie arrived to find Hiroshi and Naomi on the couch with a photo album. They looked up at her, and for the first time, Naomi's expression held something like peace. "Come sit with us," she whispered. Sophie joined them. She looked at the photos, Hannah laughing, Hannah growing, Hannah alive. "She was beautiful," Sophie whispered. "She was," Naomi said. "And she still is. Here." She pressed a hand to her chest. "She'll always be here." Hiroshi covered Naomi's hand with his own. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Sophie watched them, tears shining in her eyes, not from devastation, but from something gentler. Something like gratitude. "Thank you," Naomi said softly, "for being here, for not giving up on us." "You didn't need saving," Sophie whispered. "You just needed someone to sit with you while you found your way back." Naomi squeezed her hand. "You gave us hope. You reminded us we're still allowed to live." Hiroshi nodded. "You became family, Sophie." Sophie's chest tightened with an emotion so deep she could barely breathe. By helping them carry their grief, she had learned to carry her own. And by reminding them they weren't alone, she discovered she wasn't alone either. In that quiet, sacred moment, three people broken by loss found something they never expected. A reason to keep going. 6 months after that first day in the restaurant, Sophie stood in Hannah's room one last time. But it wasn't Hannah's room anymore. Not really. Naomi had transformed it slowly, carefully. The pale blue walls were the same. The photos were still there. But the space felt different now. Not a shrine, not a tomb, but a place where memory lived gently instead of painfully. By the window, Naomi had created a small reading corner, a chair, a blanket, a shelf with Hannah's favorite books alongside the ones she had begun reading herself. "I come here in the mornings," Naomi had told her. "I drink my tea. I read. And I talk to her, not out loud, just in my heart. But it feels like she hears me." Sophie understood that in a way she hadn't before. She had begun doing the same with her mother, not clinging to the past, but carrying it softly. Now, standing in the quiet room, Sophie felt something shift inside her. It was time. Not to walk away forever, but to step back. To let Hiroshi and Naomi keep healing without leaning on her as their bridge. They were talking again. Touching again. Laughing again, gently, cautiously, but truly. They were rebuilding a life. Becoming a couple again. They didn't need her the way they once had. And that was right. That was good. Downstairs, Hiroshi and Naomi were waiting, their expressions warm but tinged with sorrow. "You're leaving," Naomi said softly. Sophie nodded. "Not disappearing. Just stepping back. You're standing on your own now." Hiroshi shook his head gently. "We'll always need you, Sophie. You're family. And you always will be," Naomi added. "But you're right. We can walk now, because you helped us stand." Sophie's eyes blurred with tears. Naomi crossed the room and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Sophie held her close. "And thank you for letting me in." Hiroshi stepped forward. He looked at her with warmth so deep it hurt. "You saved us," he said softly. Sophie shook her head. "You saved each other. I just held the door open." Hiroshi smiled, a real smile, full and alive. Then he pulled her into a hug. "You'll still come back? For dinner? Holidays? Visits?" "Of course," Sophie murmured. "You're not getting rid of me." When they finally stepped apart, all three of them were crying and smiling. This wasn't an ending. It was a turning point. Sophie walked toward the door. Hiroshi and Naomi followed, standing together in the doorway as she stepped into the sunlight. They looked like a couple again. A united front. Two people who had crossed through the darkest place and come out holding each other. Take care of each other, Sophie said softly. We will, Naomi promised. Sophie nodded and stepped into the bright afternoon. At the end of the driveway, she paused. She took out her phone. Her father's number stared back at her, a contact she had avoided for years. But watching Hiroshi and Naomi rebuild had taught her something important. It was never too late to reach out. She took a breath and pressed call. 1 ring. 2. 3. Then a familiar voice answered, hesitant, emotional. Sophie. Her throat tightened. Hi, Dad. I think we need to talk. There was silence on the line, a soft, breathless silence. I've been hoping you'd call, he whispered. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Tears of hope now, not grief. Can we meet? Maybe for coffee. I'd like that, he said, voice trembling. I'd like that very much. Sophie smiled through her tears. As she walked down the quiet street, sunlight warming her skin, she understood something profound. Grief had brought her to Hiroshi and Naomi. Love had brought them all back to life. Hannah was gone. Her mother was gone. The past could not be changed. But the future was still theirs to write. And for the first time in years, Sophie believed it could be beautiful. Because sometimes, the people we meet in our darkest moments become the light that guides us home. If this story touched your heart, if Sophie's journey reminded you that healing is still possible, then make sure you stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment. Tell us what this story meant to you. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.